Hey, it's Keith. It's a hot one here in Los Angeles, and I think I'm going to take a bit of a hot test here. This is the Bisenk anti-Semitism test. I don't know what that means yet. Anti-Semitism is like a buzzword, let's say. It's a pretty old word. It basically means that you're racist against Jewish people, and it's often clarified that it does not mean anti-Zionism, or rather, being anti-Zionist does not mean that you're anti-Semitic. I have a loose, lifelong interest in this topic. I am not Jewish, but I somehow do relate to being Jewish. From California. My dad is from Great Neck, Long Island, which is the most Jewish town in the country, and I feel connected to Jews, if I'm honest. Anyways, I don't even know if that's relevant, but I find myself interested in this topic somehow. So I want to figure out what this test might get at and what it might mean. I'm not one to claim or attack people for being anti-Semitic or racist. I am a supporter of Israel. I'm a fan of Israel in terms of traveling. I haven't always been a fan of Israel. I used to be very critical of the state of Israel as a concept. I don't believe in any real country based on religion. But nowadays, more pragmatically and more with my liberal identity as a modern Westerner, I have to recognize the amount that I share in common with my way of life with the Israelis, compared and contrasted to its neighbors, let's say. So anyways, let's get into this test. I'm sure it'll help me elucidate my thoughts and feelings, and I hope this is informative and interesting for you guys. I'm not here to attack anybody. I'm not here to, again, point any fingers or I don't really like the name calling that modern politics gets into. So I'm not interested in doing that. But I just thought I would share this test. I haven't seen this test before, but I just thought I'd share it and see what it might try and elucidate for us. So there's an attention here. This is often added to some of the spicier tests on idrlabs.com. It reads, "This test provides information on anti-Semitism for educational purposes only. The test's exploration of anti-Semitism does not imply endorsement of such stances. Any comments, associations, or actions condoning hateful conduct are contrary to the aims of this site. All information is provided as is and should not be construed to constitute professional services or warranties of any kind." Fair. I guess that's the kind of declaration that certain sites feel the need to make. So here we are. The Bisenk, I think that's probably how you pronounce this word. I think that's probably a researcher name. Anti-Semitism test. One of the most widely used anti-Semitism tests in the world is the Anti-Defamation League's, ADL, instrument, which measures hostile attitudes towards Jewish people. Despite its popularity, the test has faced criticism over validity and reliability concerns, response bias concerns, and other problems. This test was developed by the renowned psychologist and researcher Hans-Jürgen Eysenck and has been lauded for its rigorous psychometric properties and reliability. To take this test, indicate your response to each of the statements below. There's 20 questions here, guys, so let's get through them. And this sounds like this dates back a bit. I think this has probably been around a while. Anti-Semitism, again, is very old and probably peaked about 85 years ago. But it's back, so I think now is a good time to take this test. Question 1 of 20. There are too many Jews in highly paid professions. I disagree. There are a lot of Jews, proportionally speaking, in positions of power and privilege, highly paid professions. This is a stereotype, and it's based in fact, as are a lot of stereotypes. You can say this in a non-judgmental way. Again, I'll reiterate the non-judgmental version of this. There are an overrepresentation, statistically speaking, of Jewish people in positions that people aspire toward. That is the case. I don't see any reason to try and deny that. I don't understand obfuscating that kind of point. There are a lot of Jews in media, in law, in politics, and these are the kind of fields that your parents might be proud of you for having success in. But that does not mean that there are too many, right? That kind of wordage implies that you want to remove them somehow. And I certainly am not aiming to do that. I wouldn't say that about any group of people. I'm the kind of person, I suppose, that thinks that bigotry is bigotry, racism is racism, sexism is sexism. So to say something like there are too many men in highly paid positions, I don't really like the sound of that either, just as I wouldn't like the sound of there are too many women in highly paid positions or professions. So I disagree with this. But it's weird, right? Like, a question like this, I have the option to stay neutral, to fully disagree, or to partially disagree, and to agree as well, fully or partially. And I wonder what that means, right? Like, obviously, to fully disagree, it could mean how adamantly I oppose this kind of, quote, racist statement. It could also mean that I deny it technically. As in, there are not that many Jews in highly paid professions. And I've clarified what I mean to you, dear listener. I just wonder how that translates on the test and how strongly I should disagree with this. Because I like I said, technically speaking, there are a lot of Jews in highly paid professions, but too many I do fully disagree with. I think I will fully disagree with that. I commend cultures, subcultures that prosper. I commend their work ethic. I commend their sense of duty and sense of family. This is, again, like, I was raised somehow Jewish adjacent, if I may say so. I'm half Korean and half Armenian. My dad, of Armenian descent, has a lot of Jewish cultural mannerisms and attitudes, and my mom, of Korean descent, third generation, similarly has this kind of work ethic and attitude. And I do think this is a concept of culture, not blood or ancestry. But in any case, let's move on. 2, Jews monopolize everything to the detriment of others. Yeah, these two questions definitely sound like alt-right, Nazi adjacent, Hitlerian kind of commentary. And I disagree with that sort of thing. I think I'm pretty consistent in how vociferously I disagree with that sort of thing for basically every kind of group of people. I'm not really interested in race politics or identity politics in general at all. So I don't like thinking of people in these kind of groups, but I do recognize culture and how culture follows certain, let's say, ethnicities or bloodlines. That doesn't mean that they're hard and fast connected. In any case, I definitely disagree with this as well, and I think I will fully disagree with this. I don't even think that there is a nice way of saying this. Jews monopolize everything. That's obviously not true. Jews do not monopolize basketball or hip-hop. Jews do not monopolize car manufacturing. Jews do not monopolize farming. I'm a little confused who would say such a thing. I mean, it's so obviously off base. At least the previous question, you could almost read that in a, with the benefit of the doubt, given someone the benefit. Like, Jews do run things. Like, Jews run Hollywood. Like, that kind of statement, like, I could give that kind of statement the benefit of the doubt. Because Jews are they are technically overrepresented in Hollywood. I'm fine with that. You know what I mean? But someone could say that and not be fine with it. This kind of comments, it doesn't even make sense. 3. There is no reason to believe that Jews tend to be dishonest. Fully agree. There is no reason to believe that. I'm actually imagining, I'm recalling the speech given in the movie Inglourious Basterds, my favorite Tarantino film. The speech given near the beginning by Hans Landa, so expertly played by Christoph Waltz. He's this Nazi Jew hunter, in quotes, kind of guy. And he gives this whole speech about Jews being rats, this whole kind of thing that used to be in fashion in Nazi Germany, I guess I would say. I think there was this kind of belief that Jewish people were dishonest. I think that did stem from this idea that Jews ran banks and were very overly represented. I'm saying this phrase overly represented or overrepresented. I'm not saying that in a judgmental sense. I'm saying that in a mathematics kind of sense, in terms of the percentage of a population that a group constitutes versus the percentage in a field that group constitutes. So you could say, like, Black Americans are overrepresented in basketball. And that doesn't mean that there are too many. That means that, technically speaking, by comparison to their numbers in society, there are, like, Black people make up 13% of the US population, but they make up, something like 75% or 80% of the NBA population. So that's like a statement of facts. So I'm going to keep using that phrase in that way. I know it sounds a little hard on the ear, so maybe I'll find something else, but that's how I'm accustomed to hearing it like that in podcasts and philosophical discourse. So in any case, it was the case that back in the day, Semites or Jews were in charge of banks, money lending, that this kind of thing was one of their trades, because the Bible, I think it was something like the Christian Bible sort of forbade Christians from collecting debt on one another, and maybe Muslims as well, but Jews didn't have this kind of religious adherence or doctrine in their religion, so they were allowed to loan money and collect interest on that money. And then this was maybe around the time that usury laws or usury behavior, where you're overcharging someone interest, like these kind of things. This is where stuff like this comes from, right? So you have this history of Jewish people being the bank and being the money lender in a society in which that was allowed for them and few other opportunities were allowed. And based on that, people, you and I, none of us like to pay a high interest rate on a credit card, for instance. So you start associating the people running that bank with somehow ripping you off, let's say. I think that's where this kind of thing might come from. Now, that's obviously not to validate that, but I think that's, if we're going to try and understand why people think this way, I think there's something to that. But you can be a bank. Like, I don't think that my bank is dishonest when they put a high interest rate on my credit card. I think they might hide it in the fine print. They might fool me with a 0% introductory APR. I might want to accuse them of something like dishonesty, but I wouldn't have a leg to stand on in court, obviously, unless I did in a class action in which there were some sort of, dishonest practice. But in any case, my point is that there is no reason to actually believe today, right now, that Jews tend to be dishonest. I would have no reason, for instance, to imagine that the reports out of Israel right now about the death count in Gaza is dishonest. I don't actually have any real reason to think that. Obviously, they would want to do some damage control and PR management in terms of global views on the Israel-Gaza war. And Israel is obviously losing that PR campaign. Most people that I'm aware of really judge Israel's behavior. Even people that support Israel judge that. So I suppose they might have a reason to want to be dishonest, but there's no actual evidence or compelling case based on past behavior to suggest that there's a real reason to think that. What I mean is that the Jewish people and Israel in particular have not proven themselves time and again historically to be dishonest. That is not a thing that I'm aware of. I told you the kind of lore behind it and why people might believe it, but I have never seen any evidence that Jewish bankers actually were ripping off people, right? Moving on. Jews hold non-Jewish countries in a stranglehold, using non-Jews as puppets for their own interests. Huh. I mean, these are really twisted ideas coming out here. I kind of admire this test for saying such blunt things, and I can't imagine answering this in a way other than how I am, which is to disagree here. No, Jews do not hold non-Jewish countries, which is, by the way, every single country. There are no other Jewish countries. There's one. It's Israel. That's the only Jewish country. Jews do not hold every single country in the world in a stranglehold in any way. I mean, what's stranglehold? I mean, I'm trying to think of one country that Jews hold in a stranglehold. I can't think of a single country. I mean, the candidates would be the USA, Germany, Palestine, if it was a country, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Egypt. As puppets, Israel is a powerful country, to be sure. To be fair, it has a decently high GDP and a military presence outsized to its neighbors, but it is not strong enough to have puppets. I mean, I can't think of a single puppet of Israel. Egypt, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, it's three of its neighbors, are allies. They are trade partners and allies with Israel to some degree or another. Egypt most explicitly because it lost a war and traded in order to trade for its land back from Israel. It is a partner with Israel. They are on friendly terms. Saudi Arabia was about to sign a very official peace treaty, trade treaty with Israel before October 7th, 2023. But to call Egypt a puppet of Israel is a massive stretch. To call Gaza a puppet, I mean, that's obviously wrong. They are sworn enemies. Same with the West Bank, not a puppet. Is the US a puppet? No, the USA is not a puppet to Israel. The USA is an ally who supports Israel, and we can get into that. But I'm having a really hard time even understanding the mindset of somebody that might think this. I think this is so insane to say. I don't even know what this could possibly mean, honestly. I mean, okay, look, if I was to think about this from the other side, if I was to say something like Palestine holds non-Muslim countries in a stranglehold, using non-Muslims as puppets for their own interests, I actually might agree more with that because of how propaganda works and how useful idiots, the definition of a useful idiot. Let's define that, guys, real fast. This is a phrase from the USSR, and I think it's appropriate to talk about here. A useful idiot is a pejorative description of a person suggesting that that person thinks they are fighting for a cause without fully comprehending the consequences of their actions, and who does not realize they are being cynically manipulated by the cause's leaders or by other political players. The term was often used during the Cold War to describe non-communists regarded as susceptible to communist propaganda and psychological manipulation. A number of authors attribute this phrase to Vladimir Lenin, but this attribution is not supported by any evidence. Okay, so I had been assigning that to Lenin or Stalin, but it's a phrase from the USSR, and again, I want to reiterate this. The person thinks they're fighting for a cause without fully comprehending the consequences of their actions, and who does not realize they are being cynically manipulated by the cause's leaders. Now think about TikTok. Think about Osama bin Laden's manifesto that was out on TikTok some months ago, and how many people liked that and thought that was cool. Think about the protests for Palestine and all of the good people, the do-gooders of the West, who march to free Palestine because they are so sad to see innocent babies and mothers slaughtered by Israel. That person, in my opinion, is being manipulated and are fighting for a cause that they think is just without fully comprehending the consequences of their actions. Those consequences are a high spike in anti-Semitism, in hate crimes toward Jews, in the calling into question the right of Israel to exist, right? So these are the consequences of such behaviors, and I would describe people that I might even know who might find it appropriate to march in the streets of New York and LA and Berlin. I might describe such people as useful idiots. And this is not meant, I'm not going after anybody right now, but I think that's interesting to think about. All right. I don't think that goes this other way. Might I be a useful idiot for Israel? Might I be a tool who is accidentally supporting genocide right now because I stand up for Israel? I'm very aware of what's at stake in this war. I have a very strong allegiance to liberalism and modern democracy. I have a very strong allegiance to human rights, the rights of minorities, the right to practice any religion, the right to express yourself however you want. These are my values, and I am very adamant in those principles. And I know that war is terrible, and people might die. People who are opposed to my values. Who are opposed to my values? Israelis or Muslims? Next question. Jews have too much power and influence. This is similar to the first question. Jews have an outsized amount of power and influence compared to their numbers. What do you think, how many Jews are in the world? Like, what do you think is the population percentage of Jews? If there were 100 people in the world, how many of them would be Jews? What do you think? I'm going to say one. What percentage of the world is Jewish? As of 2023, the world Jewish population is estimated to be 15.7 million, which is around 0.2% of the world's population of 8 billion. So closer to zero. I was off by a factor of 5 to say 1 full percentage point. Should we try Muslim? You want to guess? 25.8% of the world is Muslim. So put that in context, you David and Goliath fans, you victim and perpetrator fans. most of my friends who think that Israel is just dead wrong in everything they do because they are Mr. Western might and power, and Palestine is just this poor little country with nothing. Think about these numbers. 25.8% of the world is Muslim. 0.2% is Jewish. I mean, I don't know how... I don't even know how to fully remark on that, other than just stating those numbers again and again. This is, I mean, like, if you're going to talk about the Israel-Palestine conflict in terms of David and Goliath, the Muslim world is the Goliath. They run the show in the Middle East, basically speaking, right? They have Israel surrounded. They have spread far and wide from Mauritania to Indonesia. Jews are well represented in New York and Hollywood, for sure. But, yeah, I don't know. Take it for what you will. Jews have too much power and influence. I disagree. I'm just going to softly disagree. Or will I? Will I fully disagree? Obviously, they don't have as much power and influence as you're accusing them of if so many people are marching in the streets in favor of their enemy. Right? Obviously, they don't have that much power and influence if the Jewish population still hasn't recovered to the numbers it had pre-World War II and Hitler. It is still not fully recovered from the 6 million that died in World War II. Jews have the power and influence to settle a new country called Israel in the 1900s. They definitely cashed in as much goodwill and guilt as they could to form a country. So they have some power and influence, obviously. Too much? Like, why would you say too much? You think it's too much to have a country? I don't think it's too much to have to ask for a country. Again, I've said this before on my podcast, I would not have put Israel there, necessarily. Maybe I wouldn't have put it there. Maybe I would have carved out land between Germany and Poland. Maybe I would have gone into the New World of the Americas and Canada. I don't know. I don't really care about the Old Testament and the biblical lands, but that's what won out. And what was there anyways? What was already there? I mean, I know that people lived there, but it's similar to like in a city like the city you live in. Questions of gentrification and development come up. Yeah, certain neighborhoods are marginalized or even fully bulldozed to make room for a new project like a baseball stadium or an arena or a new shopping district. That's called development. There are sometimes some casualties to development. Those casualties tend to be paid off very nicely. They're not slaughtered, I'll tell you that. So I'm a little confused what people mean when they say this. I'm trying to think who I might say this kind of statement about. Like, you know, I'll name another hot topic group that has more power and influence than their numbers might suggest, and that is Black Americans. Black Americans have a ton of power, soft power, and influence. Think about that. Oscars So White, Black Lives Matter, you know, sports, music, celebrity. Black people are very well represented compared to the numbers, much more so than Latinos and Hispanic people, much more so than Asians. Now, that doesn't mean they have too much, does it? It just means that they have a lot. They have a significant amount. Who's to say what's too much? I mean, I suppose a lot of people might say that white people have too much power and influence. I'm not one of those people. I tend to like I tend to think that if something is going well, whoever might be, quote, in charge of that thing is probably deserving it and probably doing well. Hollywood is not doing that well right now, so I might castigate whoever's running the show there as if it was a person or a group of people. I would say wokeness is to blame, and perhaps the money men are not acting swiftly enough to get such ideologues out of the room. But so long as something is running well, I'm not going to complain too much, you know. Jews are decent people. I want to agree. It's weird to say that about a group of people as diverse as an ethnicity. Like, the way I like to think about stuff like this is that there is more diversity within any group than between groups. So like within men and women, there is more diversity than there is between men and women, right? There are bad people. There are bad men, there are bad women, there are good men, there are good women. And that difference between the bad and the good is greater than the differences between men and women. And it's the same about Jews. There are schmucks as well as mensches, right? I mean, we all know that. There are some non-decent Jewish people. Harvey Weinstein as an easy example, right? Obviously, there's also Oskar Schindler. I guess he wasn't Jewish. Pardon that mistake. Sometimes German names and Jewish names kind of sound similar to me. But obviously, Einstein is a decent person. So, yeah, there are decent Jews. There are also not decent Jews. I would never say that Jews are decent people, because even though it doesn't sound racist, it's like collectivizing an entire group of people that is too large to collectivize, in my opinion. I wouldn't want to say this the same way that I wouldn't want to say that Jews are bad people. Though, I suppose if I'm being as honest as I can, I tend to like Jewish people. I tend to like Jewish culture and customs. Not all of them, not all the food, not all the religion or the traditions or the holidays, but in general, I enjoy the decency of Jewish attitudes and behaviors. So I guess I want to slightly agree, even though intellectually I feel like I should stay neutral. I'm going to slightly agree. I think, like, even if you think about the war happening, Israel, if you want to personify a country as a person, as if Jews are Israel, which they're not, Israel could nuke Gaza tomorrow, right now, right this second. They could do that. They don't do that. There's a reason they don't do that. Jews could... I've seen some videos online of bad behavior practiced by the IDF, the Israeli Defense Force. There are some bad apples. So there's bad behavior in war, and there's some bad apples in the Israeli army. They could be worse. They could be a lot worse. Jews could literally do whatever they wanted to Palestinians. They have the might to pull it off. How that would play out is another question. Would the whole war, punish Jews collectively for that kind of behavior? Maybe. I don't know what that would even look like, but Israel intentionally warns Gazans about the next strikes, about the next seizing of territory. Not seizing of territory, they're not seizing territory. The next... how do they describe what they're doing? They're going into specific areas in which their intel shows Hamas activity and clearing it out. through means of war. So that's bombing, that's invasion. They're clearing out what they can of the Hamas infrastructure, which is a set of tunnels and stockpiles of weaponry. And they're doing that by announcing that they're coming to all the civilians so that the civilians can prepare to leave. Only decent people do that. Like, you don't have to do that in war. You don't have to do that. Like, Germans didn't do that in World War II. The French didn't do that in retaliation in World War II. Like, it's not expected that you have to, like, be on your best behavior in war. But Jews are doing that. So, I'm not saying that Israeli policy represents all Jews, because it doesn't, but if you were to say that, and you wanted to look at how Israel was behaving within war, I think I would argue that it is actually decent. You would argue, obviously, that it's not, because you don't think any war is justified. I'm not as naive as that. I think war happens, and it's hell. So anyways, I'm going to slightly agree with this question. Number 7. The Jews as a whole cannot be held responsible for the bad things individual Jews have done. Now, I ask you, dear listener, how could you disagree with this? Think about any other group. Let's just try this. Women as a whole cannot be held responsible for the bad things individual women have done. Asians as a whole cannot be held responsible for the bad things individual Asians have done. This is the thing about collective identity politics. The thing is that individuals can have rights, individuals can have responsibilities, but groups cannot. Like, if you're going to hold a group responsible for something, how do you do that? Like, how does that even work? How do you play that out? If you're going to hold all men responsible for, like, the evils of the patriarchy, how does that play out exactly? Other than just, like, a very messy and annoying culture war of the sexes. Like, how does it play out to blame groups? I mean, I'll tell you how it plays out. It's called genocide. That's how it plays out. Strongly agree. Disliking Jews comes mainly from misunderstandings. I guess I'll agree with that. I guess I'll agree. I want to think that this is true. I think ignorance or naivete do explain a lot. I don't think that most people marching to Free Palestine are anti-Semitic. I don't actually think that. I think that most people marching to Free Palestine think they're supporting a cause more just than what they are supporting. And I think that most people that march in those marches would stand up for Jews also, if it was cool, and if it was, if there was a big social media campaign explaining why they should. I think that's as far as it goes for a lot of people. I do think disliking Jews comes also from propaganda, from habit, from social acceptability, from a lot of things. It's not just misunderstandings, right? But I do think it's more misunderstandings than it is genuine hatred. I don't think that people are born disliking Jews. Even within the Arab world and the Muslim world, kids are taught very, very early on how bad Jewish people are. That's like a thing. It's very, very, very common to be born into the Middle East and hate Jews. But it's not inborn. It's not innate. It is taught and learned. And I think that is a misunderstanding. I would call it a misunderstanding. I think they would call it the teachings of Muhammad. But I think that's, I don't know, I guess I still want to call that a misunderstanding, but I'm not going to fully agree. I'm just going to partially agree with this. Number 9, Jews are a menace to the countries they live in. What country has suffered because it had Jews? Jews, I'm just thinking about the alt-right march, Jews will not replace us. Like, what if Jews replaced you? I mean, this happens in, like, elite institutions, right? Like Harvard is a good example. Harvard right now is experiencing an influx of Asians because Asians excel on admission standards. This used to be the case with Jews, and Harvard used to want to keep out Jews, just like it's trying to keep out Asians now. How is that a menace? How is excelling on a standardized test a menace? How is performing well in an essay or in, your community, having the honors and awards and accolades and maybe the memberships to clubs and achieving groups, like, how is that being a menace? I'm a little confused by that. I would call a menace things like high crime rates, high poverty rates, and even then that's a very dicey thing to get into, as I'm sure you know. I fully disagree with this. I think Israel, if we're gonna look at a country that is mostly Jewish, or at least technically, officially Jewish, there is no way in which I don't think that Israel is a menace to the Middle East. I don't think that. I guess some people think that. I think people that are, quote, anti-Zionist would say, and tell me if I'm wrong, tell me how I'm wrong. If you don't want Israel to exist, or at least to not exist there in the Levant, isn't it because you think Israel is a menace to that land? And if not, then why do you want it removed? Why would you want a beacon of hope removed? Why would you want the only bright spot for women's rights and gay rights? Why would you want that removed? Unless you thought it was a menace. I would rather reform the places around it. That's me. 10. Jews are isolated as a group because of their inflexible religion. I think my past self would have maybe appreciated the phrasing here, because I think a lot of religious zealotry is inflexible. I mean, zealotry, of course, is by definition, but I don't think that Judaism is any more inflexible than Islam or Christianity. In fact, by comparison to Islam, it's downright fluid. Compared to Christianity, I still think it's flexible. Most Jews I know are agnostic, if not atheist. You can't get away with that in Islam. I mean, good luck trying. But there have been a lot of stories read and wrote about that. I've read some. Ayaan Hirsi Ali comes to mind. If you're going to talk about inflexible religions, I don't think you would start with Judaism. Sure, it's still a religion, and it has doctrines and behaviors that I don't personally like or agree with. Circumcision comes to mind. Pork and the rules around that come to mind. Marrying only within your tribe comes to mind. But these things are not specific to Jews whatsoever. Not whatsoever. What I've seen around the world in my travels and where I've lived is that in-grouping happens. It usually happens based on ethnicity. It also happens on religion. It can often happen based on tastes and preferences, which is, I think, ideal. But in-grouping happens, and wherever you go, you will find your people. People tend to do that anyways. It's usually based on bloodlines because people are tribal. To make Jews an exception there is strange. Jews are not an exception. Jews are ordinary. Jews are tribal like everybody to some degree. I would even argue that they're less tribal, personally. I think Jews are very, very happy to get along in a very Dutch way, which is to say a capitalist way. I think that in Hollywood and in Wall Street, Jews are very happy to do business with anyone, just like the Dutch were when they founded New Amsterdam. I don't think that's the case in every group. I'm going to slightly disagree. Quite frankly, I think a better statement might be Jews are isolated as a group because of other people's inflexible religion, specifically Islam, and how inflexible it is to allowing a Jewish state in the Middle East, which is really what this is about. That is what this is about. Islam does not tolerate a Jewish state, especially in its region. And that is the fundamental heart of the matter in terms of Israel and Zionism. It is not the inflexibility of Jewishness, of the Jewish religion. It is the inflexibility of Islam. Hot take. 11. Jews will stoop to any kind of deceit in order to get what they want. Full disagreement. Next. Jews cheat and are corrupt. Full disagreement. Next. Jews lack physical courage. Full disagreement. Next. There is a certain justification to why Jews have been disliked by most other people throughout history. Okay, finally, some nuance, some sophistication compared to these racist statements. There is a certain justification to why Jews have been disliked by most other people throughout history. Well, I was explaining that, right? I was giving some amount of flavor to that. And I think there is. I think people, Europeans and Arabs in particular, have found reasons to dislike Jews throughout history. I mean, that's kind of a fact, isn't it? That they've found reasons. Whether or not those reasons are justified is another matter. And look, I can only really speak to my perspective as a 21st century person. I didn't live in the 13th century Middle Ages. I don't know how terrible and disgusting the behavior of Jewish communities was. Maybe it was bad. I don't know. I've never read anything like that. More relevant or analogous to me and my time would be gypsies in Europe, I suppose, or certain immigrants to the US nowadays, I suppose. There are stereotypes that, again, it's not like I'm a fan of stereotypes, but I don't condemn them fully as some sort of hate speech. Like, stereotypes are used because they're generically and very broadly and humorously true. So insofar as there are some bases to stereotypes, there might have been in the past certain bases for why people hated Jews. I mean, it could be. But that does not mean that those people were right. It doesn't mean that Jews were fundamentally wrong in these, ways in which they deserved to be treated as subhuman. This is worded very dangerously because someone like me, who is very annoyingly technical about wording sometimes not, I might be a little hung up on what this is really asking, and maybe by agreeing a little, I'm somehow condoning this, which I don't want to do. But obviously in the past, there has been a certain justification. I guess that does sound bad, so I shouldn't agree. That wording doesn't work for me. Yeah, I'm thinking about like Chinatown. I'm thinking about how the Chinese in general settle in new communities and group so strongly together that they create their own neighborhood within a city, like the Chinatown in your city. It's very common. It's very common of all kinds of people. I can't imagine wanting to destroy that community, though my preference would be to generally blend in and amalgamate into your society. That's my perspective as a possible foreigner to your country. My goal would be to kind of blend in. Of course, as an expat in Berlin, I stayed within the expat community by and large. So, I don't know. That's off topic. I think I'm just going to slightly disagree with this. I'm not fully disagreeing because, again, the wording, I'm not sure. Like, I think technically the statement is honestly true, but that, I mean, I think it would be better to say it like this. There have been certain justifications used to dislike Jews by most other people throughout history. Like, people have used justifications. That doesn't mean that they were justified in doing it. 15. Jews are just as valuable, honest, and civic-minded as any other group. Yes. And I would insert any group into that. Blank are just as valuable, honest, and civic-minded as blank. I certainly, even if that's not technically supported by data, because sometimes data can be accused of being racist, it's still true in a spirit, in a sense, right? Like, it's what we should believe. Every individual, especially, but also group, deserves the benefit of the doubt and time to blend in and get themselves straightened out within reason. We're not here to talk about all that, though. Jews seldom help anyone but their own kind. You know, I'm thinking of a comic, deceased, Patrice O'Neill, hilarious guy. Big black guy, 90s, 2000s era. He would talk in his podcast interviews about how his people were these like mid-level, middle management kind of Jews, and how he would go along, get along, and that they liked him for what he did, and they could find money, you know, and exploit him just as he would use them, right? I mean, that's kind of how business works. I'm not trying to use these words too incendiary of a way, but the way he talked about it, and he was kind of, you know, I tell it like it is kind of comic. He had an affection for his people, his Jews, and I'm sure the feeling was mutual. It was a mutually beneficial arrangement, and he was not Jewish. So I don't know if that, to me, that does color how I answer this. It's obviously easy enough for me to think of an example in which Jews might help someone that's not their kind. I mean, is it that hard to imagine? Is it that hard to imagine? Do you think Einstein only wanted to help Jews? I mean, and furthermore, like, this kind of attack, this is human nature. People help their own kind. Like, that is what we do. We in-group, we care about our family and our loved ones first and foremost, and that is normal and okay to make sure that your family has what it needs before going out and caring about the rest of the world. That is okay to do. And to attack one group of people like Jews or Muslims or Asians as doing that normal thing, whereas as if you're not doing that, you know, I really don't like that. I really don't like that. I mean, that is racism. 17. A Jew living in the West is often just as loyal to his country as a white person. Yeah, I'm sure that's the case. I mean, I'm thinking about Einstein. I mean, that's a very funny example, right? Because obviously Albert Einstein left Nazi Germany. He was not as loyal to Germany as a white person. But the exception proves the rule, I think. Is often just as, I mean, that is such a patronizing, pejorative statement. A lady living in the West is often just as loyal to her country as a man. What a ridiculous sentence. It's such a ridiculous sentence. Like, does this need to be said? But yes, I mean, I agree with it, I suppose. It's just like, it's like, what am I doing here? Like, I cannot believe that not everybody. Does anyone need to hear that? Is this a question to anybody? Living in the West. I mean, Western canon is Judeo-Christian history. You know, like, the Bible begins with the expelling of the Jewish people from the tip of northeastern Africa into Europe. That is like how Western canon was founded, practically. So to say that, like, a Jew living in the West as if they were coming from the East, no. Like, it's, what is that? What is that? Like, I don't want to fully agree with this statement because it's so stupid. But I guess I will. The thing is that Jews also, until very recently, did not have their own country. They had their own country, Judea, 2,000 years ago, way before Muhammad ever showed up. That country was taken from them by, if I'm recalling correctly, Alexander the Great. And they were still allowed that land until the Ottoman Empire, essentially. I guess there was probably a caliphate before the Ottomans who had taken it from the Jews, and I think that the Palestinians actually point to those caliphates as why they deserve that land historically, because previous caliphates had conquered it, fully ignoring the fact that those caliphates conquered it from Jews. But anyways, I'm bringing all that up because it's just another layer of silliness to this statement. What other country could a Jew be loyal to aside from the country where they were born? They are, like, Jews do not come from Jewland the way that Germans come from Germany or the Irish come from Ireland. Jews come from Poland, Germany, France, the USA, etc., etc. So it's very confusing to me, this whole sentence. I can't believe I'm fully agreeing with it, but I wouldn't want to do otherwise. Jews are money grubbing and always try to cheat non-Jews in their dealings with them. You know, my last name is Telfian or Telfan. It's Armenian by heritage, and I live in LA where there's a large Armenian population, the biggest after Armenia, I believe, in its diaspora. And I'm in Echo Park, Silver Lake, which is pretty adjacent. It's actually almost directly in between Little Armenia, which is the first Hollywood neighborhood that Armenians settled in, like in this state anyway. So that was like 100 years ago, maybe. My family goes back like 140 years to New York. But the California Armenians settled around where I live, and now there's a major population in Glendale. And I'm kind of right between East Hollywood and Glendale. And so I meet other Armenians, like, just in my life, you know, like if I hire a contractor to look at something in my house, that person can very easily be Armenian. If I go to a smoke shop because, you know, Christine wants a vape pen or something, that proprietor could very easily be Armenian. I'm saying this because I have a skepticism of being fleeced, or at least how do I put it? A lot of things, like, you know, your car, roofing on your house, a plumber, even a pack of cigarettes, or some sort of 2-for-1 deal on a vape pen. These things have, like, fungibility in terms of, like, what you spend and what kind of deals you get. I think we've all heard the phrase something like, for you, because I like you, I'm going to give you a deal, you know? And you might think that people, because they in-group, they might give their people a better deal. And that could even, I mean, that is true. We know that is true. You give your friends a better deal when you can. Your employee discount, for instance. But that does not mean that you give all people of your ethnicity that deal, right? So I'm just like focused on this idea that let's play a game in which we say that, okay, Jews are money grubbing. Do you think they're like, if you're money grubbing, are you suddenly not money grubbing because it's your family or your friends? Like, you're probably still money grubbing, especially like more broadly in society. Like, if you are Irish and you are money grubbing, not a stereotype, but nonetheless, like, you're what, not going to be money grubbing because you're in an Irish bar? Like, no, you're still going to be like that. I really don't get that. Hello? Hello? Who's this? I don't need it. Thank you. Bye. Why did I answer that? Mom, I'll never forgive you for putting me on this damn contractor list, and I'll never stop getting calls. Pardon my podcasting, guys. I just thought that'd be a quick call. That was a really stupid thing that I did to answer that call. Anyways, this is obviously a bullshit statement, and I'm going to fully disagree with it. 19. Jews have too much control over the media. Quite frankly, I wish they had more at this point. Jews are very well represented in Hollywood, to put it mildly. And that's fine with me. Again, like, different groups, especially in LA, but in your city too, I'm sure, insofar as you have diversity in your city, groups will come in and find their trade, and they will kind of take over and dominate that trade. You know, I mean, that's like, I don't know how far back that kind of tale goes, but I'm sure very, very far back. In LA, it's generally Filipinos and other Southeast Asians that run donut shops. It's generally Koreans that run nail salons. It's generally, it's generally Mexicans and Latin Americans that run contracting and handymen. And it's just the way that things play out, like in general, in societies like ours, if you're entering that society as a new person, it behooves you to learn a skill that other people can benefit from. It's like obvious, isn't it? And when you do that and more people come to that town that you grew up with or your families knew each other, like, they're going to be plugged into that with you. It's just kind of how it goes. And somehow the media, Hollywood, like, this is a thing that Jews got into early. And, if you look at the macro view of Hollywood and American media and culture as an export and as a what do I want to say, as a sort of power in the world, it's a thing. U.S. arts and media are a huge juggernaut. That's the word I wanted. And insofar as Jews control it, they deserve a lot of credit for that. They do not have too much control. I mean, right now, again, I would complain that woke ideology has too much control over the media. I don't think that Jews are the ones injecting that in. Though obviously there are certain, whatever. There are all kinds of people in that movement. I disagree. I fully disagree. You know what? I'm going to partially disagree. I will give the devil its due here to those who think that such industries and yeah, insofar as like we want representation, insofar as we care about the idea of representation, other groups of people should have influence in something as large as media. I could admit that. Maybe there need to be other voices in the room. If Jews I mean, I don't think that the voice of Jews is that strong, to be honest with you. Like, I guess I would say that there is a certain brand of humor that has pervaded mainstream media for my lifetime and beyond. That brand of humor is largely Jewish in origin. And I like it. I have no problem with it. I mean, Jewish humor, British humor, I mean, those are the best, in my opinion. There could be room for other voices, and I think insofar as Jews care more about other things, if you want to attack them, for instance, for caring more about the bottom line, then I think they make plenty of room for other people. I mean, just look at your Netflix account. God damn, I mean, how Jewish is it? It's like no more Jewish than anything else, and it's everything else, right? So I don't really understand this. I don't understand this conspiracy theory that Jews control the media. Jews are very highly represented in positions of power within Hollywood. Yes. What does that mean? Like, what does that equal? Like, there is no evident sign of some sort of like now what? We all have to read the Talmud or something? We all have to like stop eating bacon? Like, nothing like that happens. So I don't really understand like this complaint. Like, so what? Like, if every single studio head was Jewish, I don't care. If every single Jewish head is woke, I do care, because that's an ideology that is telling me what to think. It's telling me that I'm wrong for thinking what I think, that I won't have friends if I don't stop doing that and start doing what they want. Jewish people don't operate like that. So I'm like confused how this is a problem. You know, like the Jewish religion is one of like very elite in grouping that you're not allowed into. Great, have your club. Have your club. I don't need to be invited to the synagogue. I really don't care. Have your thing. Have Hanukkah, have the high holidays. Do whatever you want with a dreidel. Do whatever you want. I mean, even circumcision, which I'm against, like, people do it. I think it should be stopped, actually. So I think that's probably where I would conflict the most with Jewish power. I know that Michael Bloomberg, while mayor of New York City, this was brought up as something the city would outlaw. This happens in Germany as well. Circumcision has been on the table to outlaw for a while, and the Jewish powers that be have stopped that from being outlawed because it's their tradition. I disagree with them. But otherwise, like, I don't know how that's playing out in a negative way within media. So yeah, I don't agree with this. They don't exercise identity politics in their control of things insofar as they control them. 20, last question, guys. There is no real difference between Jewish people and people of other races. Fundamentally speaking, I agree with this statement. Obviously, there are differences between people groups. I don't know how blind we want to pretend we are. Jewish people have certain physiognomy, archetypal behaviors and mannerisms, even possibly nebbishness as an example. You could argue that there is a certain Jewish trope or Jewish look, but those aren't real differences. I guess that's what I would want to say here in agreement with this statement. There's no real difference. There's no real difference between Jewish people and other people. Oh, I think probably a Jewish person might argue that there are real differences, like how subjugated they've been throughout history, how put upon their people have been historically. That's a real difference to some people. Look, I could go very kumbaya here and say that we're all one human race and that our similarities bind us better than our differences divide us, yada yada. I basically do think that way. Or rather, I'm open to that always being the case. I think actually in practice, people get very set in who they are and who their people are. And that plays out in a real way too. So there are very real differences. There is a very real difference between an Israeli person and a Hamas person right now. That's a very real difference. So, but I know plenty of woke Jewish people that hate Israel. Actually, I don't know plenty. I might know a couple Jewish people that are anti the war against Gaza. I might know one or two Jewish people who advocate for a ceasefire. I'll put it like that. Jewishness is not the utmost thing. I think that's what I want to say fundamentally, is that being Jewish is not an utmost thing. I'm going to slightly agree with this, not fully agree. Let's see where I am. Finishing up. I have a strongly philo-Semitic attitude, a love of Jewishness. Strongly philo-Semitic, 5% out of 100. Based on your responses, it's clear that you hold strong support and admiration for Jewish people. Your attitudes toward Jews are characterized by a genuine appreciation for their cultural heritage, contributions to society, and resilience in the face of historical challenges. You actively promote Jewish causes, advocate for Jewish rights and equality, and celebrate Jewish traditions and achievements. Your commitment to understanding and valuing Jewish culture is commendable, fostering a positive and inclusive outlook towards Jewish communities globally. Wow. Well, thank you very much, S. Test. Thank you for affirming how good of a guy I am. I don't know if I would even go this far, guys. Honestly, I'm not out here trying to celebrate Jewish traditions and achievements personally. I think if this was a question about blackness and anti-blackness or racism test, I like to think that I would have answered it the same. And I'm not out here pretending that I'm out trying to celebrate Kwanzaa or even Juneteenth, which just happened. I mean, Juneteenth, I don't know if people need a day off for that. Just like I don't think if people need a day off for, the 8 days of Hanukkah. I mean, Hanukkah's not a high holy holiday, so I guess that's a bad example. But I do very much appreciate Jewish cultural heritage and Jewish contributions to society, or rather, individual contributions to society from people who happen to be Jewish. Albert Einstein, I keep coming back to as an obvious example. Some people might say Jesus. Yeah, I like to foster a positive and inclusive outlook towards all communities globally. I think that I'll end here on a very dicey, unnecessary point, because I could obviously just close now and feel really good about myself. But culture is a thing, and cultures differ, and some cultures, hot take, are better than other cultures. And I do think that the Jewish culture is one of the better ones. And I know that opens me up to accusations of all sorts, but it won't open me up to being called anti-Semitic, that's for sure. I think culture is very important, and the Jews have fostered over many thousands of put upon years a very proud culture of resilience and ingenuity. And that is how they've gotten into levels of security and privilege that they've gotten themselves into. And I do applaud that. I think that's remarkable. I think it's remarkable. And I wish that for every group. I wish that sort of success for your personal identity group. And I think that the only thing stopping it is cultural, not biological, not inborn, but cultural learned behavior and attitudes. And the Jewish people, to use a very dicey, maligned term, are a model minority, even. So I guess I'll leave it there as an awkward ending. That's Keith taking the Eisenach anti-Semitism test and passing the flying colors, from what I can tell. Hope you guys have enjoyed, and I'll talk to you next time.